Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. Welcome to today's video. Today we are doing my July wrap-up. Actually this month I did quite a few books. I ended up with 12 books and then a DNF as well on top of that. All because I set a TBR, would you believe, and I almost stuck to it. By this much. I missed it by this much. So according to a Storygraph, which doesn't include DNFs, I read 12 books. Well done. And then, of course, I have one DNF, which isn't counted. Even though I got 50% through it, I think that deserves a tick in the red box. Surely. Anyway, so it was 3,684 pages. Which is a lot of pages, I suppose. My average rating was actually 4.48. So I had a good reading month in regards to ratings. But also, sometimes I'm a bit lost with ratings, so... Mostly fantasy, some romance, classics, children's, and manga. If you are new to the channel, I actually do spoiler and non-spoiler versions of my TBR. I like to rant sometimes and I use my videos to do that, but I don't want people who have never read the books to get spoiled. So that's why I do that. And obviously right now you are on the spoiler version of the video, so if you don't want spoilers, I'll link the other video now in the cards and down below as well. So that's the stats for the video, and now we can actually get into my rundown and reviews. Let's go! Our first book for July was Dragon's Nest, which is the first section of Deltora Quest 3, and is technically its own book, but all four together make Deltora Quest 3. And this book is by Emily Rhoda, or Rudder. I change it around, I swip swap. So what is Dragon's Nest about? We find ourselves with Leaf. I don't want there to be spoilers for the rest of the series, so this is going to be a little difficult to work around, but I'll get through it. But we're following Leaf, who is the main character of the entire Deltora Quest series, and then his two helpers, side characters, Barda and Jasmine. Now in this book, they're trying to defeat the Shadow Lord, trying to banish him, defeat him once and for all. And they discover that there is actually a curse over Deltora, which they didn't know about, but are now very much discovering. And this curse is like in the ground, people can't grow crops, and they're all starving. And this curse was put on the land by, I believe it's 4 witches. And in order to defeat these 4 witches, they need to go travel and try and find the dragons of Deltora, who are the only ones powerful enough to defeat these witches and rid the land of this curse. Now, as always with Emily's work, I really love how she puts like little diagrams and pictures in. And some of the letters Leaf exchanges with further afield associates, I suppose, are in code. And so when you're reading, they have the picture first, and so you can try and decode the letter first, and then they usually give reasoning or translation afterwards. Although once they didn't do that, and so I decoded it, and they never gave the translation in the actual text, so I just felt like I was smart. Of course. It gives you a little break to do a little puzzle, and it's just fun to have little graphics all the way through. Now, Leaf's character is actually really tested a lot. He's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders. And while there are other characters that are there to support him, there's still extra weight on him. Being the main character and all, Leaf just has an extra portion, which is more like an entire, blockade of weight on him. I think he just likes traveling with his little party. I'm not gonna lie. And I love how Leaf, despite going through all this horrible stuff in the previous books and even in the current book, he still has this ingrained kindness to him. It's not like he's become jaded against the world or anything, and I think that really helps his character along. Now, Bada and Jasmine, they play a part in this, but they are, I guess, slightly removed. I don't think they do as much as in, say, book 1 of the series. But they're still there, still supportive. But yeah, definitely Leaf has the most burden on his shoulders in this first book. And of course, being the third book in the series, they do in fact bring in characters that you meet in the other books, and so you can sort of have these little Easter eggs of characters if you've managed to get through the other 2 books, which is kind of recommended. So in the end, I rated Dragon's Nest a 4.5. It was very good. Not quite 5 stars. I don't need to tell you it's almost 5. I always tend to say it's almost 5 stars. You don't need to know that. You can see that 4.5 is just slightly less than 5 because you're smart. So yes, 4.5 stars for Dragon's Nest by Emily Rhoda. Now for your spoilers. So Leaf, of course, is the Kingman, and in the very beginning of the book, they defeat that horrible orb that was sort of feeding lies to them and taking over the castle, and was the whole reason Jasmine was so annoying in book 2. They managed to take it to the forge and destroy it, and I've never been so happy. I was like, woo! So once they've destroyed this orb, they still discover that the entire land cannot grow crops. And in the coastal areas, they're trying to, of course, fish, but they can't bring in good hauls or anything. And so pretty much the entire people are starving. And so even though they slowly feel like they're defeating the Shadow Lord, they're like, we're also still in a land that is dying. Now in comes the witches. They're there, and of course they're cursing the land, and they're dotted at these certain points. They only have the one section of the map. They know it's a full map, but they only have one section. So of course they've got to go to the first spot first. Now along the way, they know they won't be powerful enough to defeat these witches, so they have to gather these dragons. Now unfortunately, dragons don't have the best reputation. Before the evil birds of the Shadow Lord came through, the dragons were actually probably the most feared things in the land, and the little birdies of the Shadow Lord actually were hunting down the dragons to kill them all, because the Shadow Lord was like, nah, those dragons be scary, and the Deltorians are like, yeah, they're scary. And so of course when the dragons disappeared from the land, the Deltorians were like, oh, danger averted. Unfortunately, there was the whole Shadow Lord thing going on as well. So Leaf, Bada and Jasmine set off with a group of soldiers to track down not only the dragon, only the trio know about the dragon, but also to defeat this witch. Now they disguise it as just an inspection of the land and to say hello to the peoples, but they are actually on this journey. Now they come across a little, I don't know, goblin-y thing, and the goblin is about to get eaten by some of the beasts from previous books. And of course Leaf jumps in and saves him. Now from the very beginning, this idiot of a goblin thing was so annoying, was not helpful at all, and honestly irritated me to no end. They travel for a while with this little goblin man, and the little goblin man, they really do not get along with the villagers of this area where the dragon's nest is, but he also hates dragons. He's like, oh my goodness, dragons, horrible beasts. Dragons come and eat us all up, kind of vibes. At one point they separate so that Leaf, Jasmine and Bada can go through the woods and get to the dragon's nest. And so they send off the goblin little dude with all the rest of the soldiers. And what happens? They get attacked by a dragon. The dragon just destroys all these soldiers. So they'd already sort of helped out this one dragon, which I believe was the red dragon, like, correct me on that. And while great fun this dragon was, he was very hungry. And of course, after this attack from a dragon, they're like, oh, why would he do that? Like, are the dragons actually bad? It's a great loss, but they've got to continue on. So they get help from this lady who they met previously, and they go up into the dragon's nest, where, surprise, surprise, the dragon has carried off the little goblin into directly where the witch is. And you may be wondering, why kidnap this little goblin thing? It's a trap. It's a trap. So the dragon has set up a trap right on top of where the witch's stone is that's cursing the land. And so, of course, Leaf is like, I better go help out this flippin' goblin thing and save him. So off they go. He manages to get the little goblin out. Next thing you know, a dragon attacks. Like, full-on fire blazes everywhere. And our young lass who is helping out gets knocked down. It's very bloody. It's not a good fight, but they manage to defeat it with the help of a dragon. Yeah, believe it or not, the dragon that was attacking them and had destroyed all the soldiers was in fact the goblin. He had been given power to transform into a dragon and was in fact the evil dragon going around. And meanwhile, the golden dragon, Topaz, I don't know, the other dragon, had woken up and was like, dude, my goodness, you're an idiot. But along comes the other dragon, helps them out, then manages to claw in and crush the witch's egg. And then goes to the sea to catch some fish because he's like, I'm flipping starved, you idiots. Okay, and off he goes. Suffice to say, a lot of betrayal by the goblin, but you never really got the chance to get attached to Goblin. Like, you admired Leaf's care and that heart to do the right thing and to help out, even though it was like slightly out of the way and a bit of a nuisance. So I admire Leaf for that. I do not blame Leaf for that. It's better to live with kindness than to be jaded. But this goblin dude was never in my good books. He was never a good guy in my eyes. Never. And therefore, when he transformed and became the evil dragon, I was like, knew it. But I did feel sorry for all those dead, burnt, crisp guards because they were cute, okay? In my little mind, I had a picture of them all. They were all so cute. But then they were burnt to a crisp. Burnt to a crisp in the beds.
And he set fire to their house at night, on purpose. Burnt them to a crisp in their beds.
Sorry. And that's that. On to the next one. Chronicles of Narnia. The Magician's Nephew. That is our next book by C.S. Lewis. Sometimes I see C.L. Lewis. Now, it's quite a classic book. A great many have read it, but there are also those who haven't read it. So it is the first chronological book of the series. Magician's Nephew is about Diggory, who lives in a house with his mother, aunt and uncle. The mother is ill, quite ill, and so she's not really up and about. And his uncle, his aunt's like, try and keep out of his way. Like, maybe just stay here with us instead of going and seeing your weird, creepy uncle, okay? And he's like, there. He seems really strange. And he's always upstairs in this attic room. And that's just a bit weird. Now, he meets their neighbour, Penny, I think. Penny Polly. Penny Polly Polly. Now, Polly is his next door neighbour. And they become friends. And there's actually this little crawl space up above the houses, like in the attic areas. And so they sort of make a little cubby in there and visit back and forth. One day they actually go across and they think they're in the next house over, which is empty. But instead they come out into the attic area of the uncle's area. And so they're like, well, this is a bit weird in here. And so in this room, the uncle has these rings and they end up going to a new land and chaos and adventure ensues. And unfortunately, the uncle comes up and is like, oh, hello, kids. And he has these rings. Now, first of all, Polly is the one that touches one of the rings and just disappears. And Diggory is like, well, where the heck did she go, Uncle? You're weirdo. And the uncle's like, oh, you'll be right. You will have to put on the ring, but also take these other 2 rings. There's green ones and yellow ones. And you'll have to go get them. It's just you'll have to go. You don't want to leave her there all by herself. Like, she's in another world now. Anyway, so Diggory follows Polly and they end up in a strange land. And there's these little pools. And if they wear one ring, they go through the pool into another world. And if they wear the other, they get pulled back into the original area. Now they choose to explore, they go through these different lands, and they come across this hall with all these statues, and there's a bell. And they can either choose to ring the bell or not ring the bell. And Polly is like, let's not ring the bell. It says something about misfortune or whatever. She's like, I can live quite happily without ringing that bell. Like in the future, once I'm back in the real world, I will not sit there going, oh, I really wish I'd rung that bell just to see what it would have done. Diggory, not so much. He chooses to ring the bell. And it awakens this ancient queen, magician lady, who's evil, would you believe? Very evil. And she's like, all right, I've destroyed this world we're in, so you're going to take me to your world, and I'm going to rule that world instead. They try to duke her, but she ends up in the real world with the uncle, who's just waiting around. And they have this whole adventure in the real world, but eventually they trick her back into the portals. But instead of going back to the Queen's world, they end up in a new place, which is completely dark. And eventually they find themselves in Narnia. Now, I really did not enjoy, there's a witch character in it. Spooky, creepy vibes. It was so creepy. And you just got manipulation, dark person vibes. And I was like, oh, ugh. Like, I could see everything going downhill, and I was like, oh, I do not like this feeling. Which I think is the point, so it's okay. Now, Diggory isn't a good character, if that makes sense. He's not a perfect little human, and he makes a lot of dumb decisions. But he's also still goes to try and save Polly in the beginning, which takes a lot of courage, which I can't say is the same for the uncle. The uncle is the least courageous man. He's a fool. A blind fool. So horrible. So there are tie-ins to the other Narnia books, which is fun to see. Also, as I say, I didn't like most of the characters in the first half. The first half, I hated pretty much everyone except for Polly. Because even though Diggory was okay at first, he went downhill really quickly. But there is a reason for all of that, so it's not like I can hold it against them. I hate characters that do things with no reason and are just idiots and dumb. And then the author tries to justify those foolish, horrible things. But in this, there's a reason. But it's just, I did not like the characters that did that. So overall, I did give it a 4.5. I really liked it. But as I say, it's not a book you go into, like, really getting super attached to all the characters and being like, they are my children. or they are my family. I need to protect and love and adore them for the rest of all time. The second half is a lot nicer on the brain. Let's just say that. Now, I actually kept journal notes this time through, which is fun because I get to see what I was thinking all the way through. So let's just run through a few of them as my spoiler section. You get to see inside the brain of Hannah while she was reading. Uncle Andrew being his creepy self and now experimenting with children. Tat tat. So his whole thing is that he's too old and fragile. So he doesn't want to go through the portal himself because what if there's danger there? He doesn't want to get caught up in danger and end up dead. But rather than say, I don't know, hiring some adults that are strong and, you know, have a fighting chance in this other world, he decides, what's the next best thing? Let's send my nephew and his friend. Because there's two of them. And I don't really care if they live or die. And they'll follow my command. So off you go, kids. Now we get to 22% through. Uncle Andrew is truly a beast, looking down on others, not wanting to put his old self in danger, because who knows what's on the other side? But sending literal children. There's no redeeming yourself from that. I've got here just one line at 35%. Diggory is a fool. So I've obviously changed tunes on Diggory. Poles has some wit, but still ended up going along. Poor stupid children. So they're like, let's jump into the puddles. And Polly's like, alright, let's go. Here's the thing. Even if they decided not to explore and just went back to the uncle, he would have then gone on to do evil. So it's best that the children did go and explore, but at the same time I was like, kids, don't. Just, no, like you were meant to come in. Diggory was meant to do an extraction mission, like go in, grab Polly and just get out. Like go. But instead they're like, oh, let's explore. Which is very childlike, but at the same time I'm like, no, the mission. Supposedly I really loved 14. Didn't give any explanation to that, but chapter 14 was really good, supposedly. But yeah, the ending of the book I really enjoyed way more. So when Aslan is creating Narnia and like the little correlations between the like biblical themes and of course Narnia. A bit different of course, but there are slight, you know, references I guess. Which I do admit you would only notice if you had like biblical knowledge. If you didn't, you would never know. But since I do have biblical knowledge, I do see the correlations and it's pretty cool. That was my 4.5 star rating for The Magician's Nephew. Next up, we have what was actually my audiobook pick for the month, and that is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. I ended up getting the physical book, as you can see, so obviously I liked it. What is Half a Soul about? Well, we follow Theodora, or more commonly referred to Dora, and she actually as a child had half her soul stolen by this fae bloke who had made a deal with Dora's mother. And he was meant to take all of her, take her whole soul, but only got half of it before he was stabbed by Vanessa, who is Dora's cousin. Now, it's a while later, and due to the loss of half her soul, her emotions are very muted. She doesn't get angry. She doesn't really get sad. She sometimes has an inkling, but it's more like she doesn't quite react the way people usually do. She's kind of just going through the motions without much emotion. Anyway, so after that, she and Vanessa and her aunt go to the city because it's the debut season, and obviously Vanessa is being introduced, and, you know, to find a husband, because that's what you do in Regency's times. Find husband, get married, live life. Now, while in the city, Dora comes across the Lord Sorcier, Elias. Now, Vanessa actually wants Lord Sorcier to help Dora to get the other half of her soul back. But Elias is kind of distracted because some children are falling asleep, I guess you would say, and he's trying to figure out why. Because once they fall asleep, they don't eat, they can't do anything, and they end up slowly dying. I adore Dora. She has wit and banter, and despite having most of her emotions gone, she still has an innate kindness. And because she doesn't get hurt over things, people are sometimes like, oh, she's a bit dumb, but she is so cool. She's a perfect main female character because she's not incredibly powerful, but at the same time, she's a bit no fuss. She takes things as they are and isn't constantly snapping all the time, which I hate when they have female characters that just snap like that. Not my kind of vibe, whereas Dora is so far from that. It's so cool. The other side characters, I didn't really get attached to a lot of them. Vanessa and then Lord, who got injured during the war with Elias, as in not fighting Elias, but as in he and Elias were together during the war, and he's a doctor. So the doctor and Vanessa are pretty cool. Vanessa, she's a bit all over the place, but I like her. The doctor is just, what a lad. And then that brings us to Elias, whose character I did not enjoy the first interaction they had. And even after that, it took him a little bit to warm on me. Because he's very blunt and very judgmental when you first meet him. But he managed to crawl his way back through his actions and through his banter, because he banters with Dora and Dora wins most of the time, in my opinion. Oh, I enjoyed it. Plus, some of the messaging in it is really nuanced, but honest, truthful. And I really enjoyed it. So I ended up giving it a 4.5. I really enjoyed it. Again, the start, there was a section I almost did not finish it. I almost gave it up, but I fought through it and then it was fine after that. I don't know why they had to include that first bit other than to make you absolutely despise Elias. So in their first meeting, Dora and Elias is so crude and treats her like she's really dumb, but in a crude way. And I never understand why authors feel the need to be so ugly. Like, you can have a conflict without getting all sexualized and dumb like that, which I didn't enjoy it. Again, as I said, I almost DNF'd it at that point, just because I was like, why do we need this? Now, I loved how Dora could banter, but not in a slashback, stabby stab kind of banter, just in a calm, collect, matter-of-fact way that sounded so reasonable. With the Fey Lord that stole half her soul, because he did that, she ends up having two of her existing. And so, of course, her first half went away with the Fey Lord and ended up getting worked and drained and trained to be the perfect daughter or whatever for this Fey Lord. And meanwhile, her other self is in the real world feeling nothing much. But whereas her other half is super emotional, just always crying and just feeling too much. And so I actually liked how in the end they didn't end up combining again. Like, it wasn't your stereotypical, there were these two halves, then in the end they come together and, Elias still likes it. They ended up having the ending where the emotional one sacrificed herself pretty much to tie her to this Fey world to help out the children that had died, and therefore their souls couldn't go back to the like human world because their bodies were dead. So she stayed there and helped out all these kids. And honestly, that was great. And meanwhile, Elias was just like, it's Dora. Her having these weakened, I guess, emotions was fine. Even though they were weakened, she didn't lack any emotions. She still did get that tinge of anger, but it was like far down. She knew something was wrong, but at the same time she was too dulled to act on any of that. So did you like that he still got Dora in the end? And that sort of side of the romance, which I was like, oh, I'm not sure about this in the very beginning, ended up liking them together. I think their acts of service and then the reasons behind Elias being a bit of a standoffish character worked out in the end. I liked how he sort of had believed that in the war he was on the right side because he didn't think anyone would be lying, but because he was in the Fae world and Fae never lie. But then when he got to the real world, he assumed everyone was telling the truth and they really weren't. And sort of that realization for him and stuff was interesting perspective to look at on sides of like the war and then the workhouses and that sort of thing. And I really liked how they didn't just solve the workhouses because that's unrealistic, but they just developed what they could, convinced those who could be convinced, and just worked against the evilness of the people running these workhouses. And it didn't solve anything, but they just did what they could. And I liked that. It was realistic, but still hopeful. And of course, our doctor found the love of his life, and also Vanessa also found someone to like. And that's just cute and adorable, and, you know, they still had marriage. And so it all worked out in the end. So yes, that was Half a Soul, which I actually did the audiobook, but now I have the physical one. Would you believe? Next, we're back in the Chronicles of Narnia, but this time we were in the classic land of the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Such a classic tale. Oh, I have my bookmark in there, which is actually part of an ice cream. The things we make do with for bookmarks. What is the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe about? Would you believe it's about a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe? No, the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe follows Lucy, Edmund, Sandra? Sandra? Who the hell is Sandra? Susan! Susan and Peter. So Peter, Susan, Lucy, and Edmund. And they have gone to stay with an uncle, would you believe, in the countryside. And while there, it's a big estate. And so the children just sort of explore the estate. They try and keep out of the way of one of the housekeepers who shows through, like, visitors through the house because they open it to visitors. And so they play a lot of hide and seek. But one day, they're playing hide and seek, and Lucy goes to hide in the wardrobe. In this empty room, there's just a big wardrobe. And so Lucy goes into this wardrobe, and as she's sort of scooching back amongst the cloaks, she finds herself in a woods, a snowy woods, and there is a single lamp post just in the middle of this forest. And so she goes out, and through a series of events, she goes back outside. Nothing has changed while she's away. But eventually, one day, some visitors are coming through, and they're like, let's hide from these visitors. And they all scooch back into the wardrobe and close it and go back and eventually find themselves all together in Narnia. And that's where they stumble across an adventure, including the witch and the lion, would you believe? I was interested to see the differences between the book and the movie. Of course, the movie actually fleshes it out. You know, in most cases, the movie actually cuts out a whole heap of stuff. In this one, they actually had to add some scenes. Now, I did love Lucy and the beavers in this story. The others I never really felt much for, to be honest, but I really did enjoy Lucy and the beavers. And I love how Mrs. Beaver in it she's very motherly. She's like, where's the food? We need some food, we're gonna go travelling, and the rest are like, we just need to go. We just need to go. She's like, we're gonna have some sort of luxury while we're travelling. I'm not gonna just let us starve. And so it's kind of amusing. The plot is rather straightforward. It was good to see good triumph. Oh, spoilers, that's spoilers. There was, again, some biblical parallels, but I noticed less in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe than in The Magician's Nephew. So I rated it a 4.5. Rather straightforward. That's about it. I didn't make many notes for it. It was just a quick read. I pretty much remembered the whole story, so it wasn't like I was sitting there noticing all these new things or anything like that. As for spoilers, let's think. So you know the tale about Edmund selling his soul for some Turkish delight, right? My mum really likes Turkish delight, but like the thin slices of chocolate covered Turkish delight you can get, not the big chunks of like the rose water Turkish delight, which is obviously the original and probably what they meant in this. The original kind of Turkish delight, not my thing. And I think a lot of people agree. And as I was saying with the different adaptations, so in the book, the final battle is about this long. Like the actual scenes with like Edmund and Peter and the army they're trying to defend against the evil witch and all the armies. About this long. It's just like the briefest mention. Whereas in the movie, like you see the whole scenes, there's clashes and all sort of things, but never happened in the book. The biggest chunk was following Aslan and Lucy as they went and freed all the statues. Whereas the battle got about that much, so that was amusing to see. But yeah, otherwise don't really have much ranting or information about the Lion, Witch and Wardrobe. Next up we have The Ruins of Gorlan, which is part of the Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan. So we start this book following Will, who is an orphan at Castle Redmont. And the orphans at Castle Redmont are put through this system, and when they turn 15, they get chosen or apprenticed out to certain battle schools or chef school or like diplomats and that sort of thing. And Will really wants to get into the battle school because his father, he believes, was a knight, and he wants to be like his dad, who was a hero, according to a little letter that was left with him on the doorstep. That's what Will wants to do, is get into the battle school, but he is small for his age, he's pretty thin, he doesn't have much muscle to him, and so the battle masters look at him and they're like, nah. And so he thinks it's all over. He's like, I'll try and convince them to let me into the school. Instead, Will catches the eye of Holt, who is the ranger of the area. And rangers are said to be a bit mysterious. Nobody really knows what they do. They're fairly quiet. And so there's all these tales about them. But because Will is fast and can sneak around, he's got these natural skills that he's honed, it catches Holt's eye. And so he actually becomes the ranger's apprentice. So while Will is actually training to be a ranger, there are actually whispers about Lord Morgorath, who the Rangers have been keeping an eye on after he led a rebellion against the kingdom, previously. So we sort of follow Will and Horace, who is his bully slash a new battle school trainee, and then another few group of friends. Alyssa, Jenny and George are other orphans that have been accepted into different schools as well. Now, I really enjoyed this. I love Will and Holt and all of them in this. And the plot, they don't get too hung up on the training stage. I don't especially love when books have a training stage that lasts forever and they go into each detail. In this book, they have the training stage, but it's glimpses into it and the brief outline. They don't sit there going through training montages for 12 years. And I actually love that because, I'm sorry, I find training paragraphs upon paragraphs to be quite tiring. It's like you're training for the marathon of getting through all that training yourself when you read it. Whereas this, it's well paced, it reads fast, so I love it. So I ended up giving this book a 5-star. And Will and Holt have a really good mentor-apprentice relationship. I really like it. And Holt is very straightforward, but at the same time, while he might grumble a bit when Will is constantly asking questions, I think he appreciates that Will is so inquisitive and wanting to do the right thing. So spoilers. Now, Baron Arold, he needs more acknowledgement for his jokes. That man is funny. And I think the fact that all his jokes fall so flat to his current audience means he needs to find a new audience because he is hilarious. Now, in the beginning, when Will is trying to ascertain whether he got into any of the apprenticeships, he, of course, is put under the test of climbing into the tower and looking at this piece of paper that Baron Arold and Holt sort of purposely was like, oh, here, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, so that Will would be sort of triggered into performing an act of stealth and sneakiness for them. And I love how when he's caught, he doesn't whine or beg or anything. He's just like, yep, I'm caught. All right. Give me my punishment. I deserve it. And I love that part of it for Will. It's all in third point of view, but we have it following Horace for a bit and then Will for a bit. And I liked it. It gave us a little breaks, but also because in the beginning Horace is not super likable, it actually helps you to like Horace a bit faster and you understand him a bit quicker. So I actually like that. And sorry if the lighting is changing. Sunshine be crazy like that. I also have a comment here that Tug is cute, and I agree. Tug is an adorable horse. The Rangers' horses are so smart and so cute and so well trained, and yet they have these personalities, and I love that John Flanagan gives them some personality. And also when Horace's bullies finally get got, it's the satisfying, like, yes, they finally got their comeuppance. Now, would I have been like, oh, I wish Will had shown some bite back? At the same time, I think it had to be Horace that gave them because obviously he was the one they mainly targeted. But I also like how Holt was there to oversee it all, you know, keep an eye on things. The inclusion of these mystical fantasy beasties was interesting. Because you sort of feel like you're just in a medieval-esque land, but then at the same time, there's Wargles and Kalkaras. So, you know you're in a fantasy land, with the magic here, fantasy, quite quickly. The beasties were beastieing. It's a pretty straightforward, light read. It had me laughing. It had me crying. and it gave me the love of character. I think that's what The Ranger's Apprentice has done best with this book, is the characters are lovable. And I really am a reader that gets attached to characters, so the character growth or the character explanation is really strong, I will attach and adopt really quickly. But if I'm not attaching myself and adopting any of the characters, I like the book less. That's The Ranger's Apprentice by John Flanagan. Woo! Okay, our next book is actually my DNF of the month, which is Daughter of the Pirate King by Trisha Levenseller. This follows Alosa, who is the daughter of the Pirate King, would you believe, who sort of runs the waters of this place. And she is captured by a pirate lord, Draxon. He's recently taken over the title from his father. And then the first mate of that ship is Ridden. And so she gets captured, but it's on purpose. Our girl is so smart. And so she's actually looking for a pirate map that is said to be on Draxon's ship, or a piece of the pirate map to this hidden siren treasure. And so she is on this ship, captured, but also freeing herself to try and find this thing. And she keeps clashing with Ridden, who is sort of put over her to keep an eye on her. And so she's got this whole plan that she's going to steal the map and then get the map to her father at this safe point. And meanwhile, her own crew of her own ship, which is a mainly female crew, is waiting for her to return. And so we just sort of follow her while she's searching for this map. And that is the general rundown on what Daughter of the Pirate King is about. Now, I didn't like the writing style of this book. Alosa spends most of her time telling the reader how cool she is, how she doesn't let her emotions show, how she's really strong, how she's really like piratey and savage and ruthless and sneaky. But she never shows any of those traits. And even when she is showing it occasionally, she's like, I am tough. I am so tough, I can get through this. Next minute, she's like, oh, I am so done with this. This is killing me. I am dead. I really like strong female characters, but I hate when the author just tells you how strong they are without backing it up with factual evidence. Because it just makes the main character seem egotistical and like she is a bit brainwashed into thinking she's good when she's really not. Like certain singers on talent shows where they like know my family and everything, love my singing, and they're obviously not that good. Yet they believe wholeheartedly they are. And sometimes it feels like that with certain female characters that are meant to be strong, independent women. So I really didn't like that. And then the whole romance, not romance going on is just a bit cringe. The characters, I didn't like any of them. I think I liked one of the other pirate dudes. That's sort of a side character. He was okay. But again, he's a scummy pirate, so there's only so much you can like about them. Yeah, so I just didn't enjoy it. I have read it through once before, and I can't remember whether I actually enjoyed it or not. Obviously, I finished it, but it wasn't like I was like, this is the greatest book in history back then. And yeah, so I got to the 50% mark and DNF'd it. I was like, I am just hate reading by this point. Because there was just so much going wrong. And I just was enjoying it that little that I was just hate reading it. And I didn't want to be that person. I know some people, they're like, I love feeling the hatred seep into my body as I read and then rant about it. But I felt like that made me a worse person. And so I do like a bit of a rant, but in order to just read a book so I could fuel the flames, it seemed a bit wrong somehow. So I did. So let's get into spoilers, shall we? So Alosa is in fact the daughter of the Pirate King, blah blah blah. But she's also the daughter of the Siren Queen. So she's all the way through. She has these certain siren powers. So our girlie, in the beginning, she's on this ship full of just a throwaway crew. And when they're captured, of course, she kills a few members, blasé, and she's like, I gotta really make this look like I'm really struggling. Like, oh, they really have captured me when I really didn't want to be captured. But all the way through, it's got these hints to, like, oh, I'm so sneaky. No one will know I've snuck off this ship. No one will know I'm sneaking around. But the very next second, she's captured. Or she's thinking about, I'm not going to allow my emotions to show to Ridden. I'm not going to, like, I am perfectly good at hiding my emotions because I've been trained to. But then she's snapping and giving away information at the drop of the hat. Like, Ridden will say something that irks her slightly, and it's not even that big a deal, and she'll be blabbing her life story. And it's meant to be showing Ridden as, like, this really nice bloke who's, he's just, like, he can't understand why she's so mean and cruel, but he doesn't like supporting Draxon when he tortures her or anything like that. He feels bad. And so they're putting forward this character of Ridden feeling bad and actually wanting to befriend our girl and kind of being attracted to her. And she's like, oh, he's kind of attractive too and nice and all that. But at the same time, you all know, like, as a reader, you're like, it's just a ploy. She's got this ego. She's like, I am sneakier than them. Doesn't cross her mind that maybe they're being sneaky too. And, you know, reversing her, pretty much. She's like, sneaky, and they're like, you know, reverse! Woo, woo, woo. Okay, so I have some notes here. Alosa, 17, a brat. And I stand by that. She's 17 years old in this, and it's so unbelievable that this 17-year-old is running a ship and is considered to be an almighty pirate, especially with the characters she shows. Young adults can read about more grown-up people. Like, 17-year-olds do not have to read about 17-year-olds doing all these crazy, crazy stuff, in my opinion. They can read a 25-year-old being a captain. So the author is a fan of making her constantly think about how smart and excellent she is, but never actually shows her being any of those things. So it's a lot of tell and not show. Alosa just ends up sounding like a pompous, prideful brat, which isn't really attractive as a character. There's wit, and then there's this. Foreshadowing is about as shadowed as a deer in the headlights. Because I don't think you're meant to know that she's a siren. It's as plain as the nose on your face that she's a siren. Nothing about this is sneaky. Ridden and Alosa, they're meant to be having this chemistry banter, but I didn't feel any of the chemistry other than suddenly she's like, oh, he cute, and he's sort of complimenting her, but it sort of felt like, oh, he's just complimenting her or trying to get her on his side so they can extract information, which of course he gets. And this whole thing that despite him really not wanting to, he's like really handsy and like holds her close and gets all like intimate, and yet he's like, oh no, I shouldn't do this. And she's like, oh, it feels kind of nice. She's like, ooh la la. After zero actual chemistry or like relational stuff, they're just all physical and like, ew, I so, ba-dum, you know. Okay, so so there's one part where they string her up to the mast, and so her arms in there get all raw and injured. And so they go back to his cabin, Ridden's cabin, to sort of tend to her wounds. But rather than just have her sit or, you know, because she's exhausted, I'll allow her to lie down on the bed and, you know, tend her wounds like a normal, regular person. No, he sits down, draws her onto his lap, and then reaches around her to tend to his, not his wounds, her wounds. And it doesn't make any sense for them to do it that way. Other than to have a token, we're being kind of romantic here. I'm like, you could have just tend to her wounds, done. I was like, this isn't romantic, this is just nonsensical. Our girl realizes that, surprise, surprise, Ridden was being nice and kind and thoughtful because he was trying to extract information from her. It's the biggest shock of the century, actually. So she finds out that he's been schmoozing her for information, and she's like, how dare he? How could he do this? How could none of it have been real? And I'm like, dude, you're pirates. You're constantly stabbing each other in the back. In fact, you're trying to manipulate them into information. Anyway, she gets really hurt over it. And then the next minute, she's smooching him. And convinces herself that, no, you know what? She's doing the schmoozing. This whole time, he's been, you know, trying to extract information by being really nice and romantic. But she's going to switch around, and now he's going to give her information because she's schmoozing him. And I'm like, that's not how that works. In her head, she's really smart. She's twisted it around. She's going to get information out of him now through the same exact method. The point where I stopped was she schmoozes him, and then she's like, oh, it's time for sleepy buys, and she's done it before, but she hums this lullaby or sings this lullaby which puts the men to sleep because, I mean, she's a siren or part siren. And so he's like, ugh. But this time, like the first time, he was lying down, so she could play it off as he just fell asleep, you know. But this time he was literally like, I'm not going to sleep, there's no way. And then she sings to him and he's like, whoop. So there's no way he's going to get up the next morning and be like, oh, I just suddenly fell asleep. Of course he's going to know then that she's half siren. And yet she thinks she's being so sneaky and everything. No one's going to know that she's a siren, except that the fact she just gave it away pretty much straight there and on the spot. So it was just a dislikable character in a dislikable plot in a dislikable crew with a bunch of dislikable stuff happening. There was a whole heap of other stuff happening as well, but as I say, I'm trying to minimize the amount of hatred I'm spewing about this book, and I've probably already repeated myself about 25 times. So we're going to move on to my non-DNF. So next up we actually have The Ghost Horse by Joe Layden, and this is a non-fiction book, and it's about the story of Tim Snyder, who is a horse trainer. He actually did a lot of different odd jobs around the racetrack during his whole life, and his wife Lisa, and then the horse Lisa's Booby Trap, which Tim trained and then raced in several races in America. It really just follows Tim's journey from being a kid in an abusive home surrounded by alcoholics, and then sort of being around his father, who was also an alcoholic. Just a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse and everything surrounding horse racing and the behind the scenes and horse breeding and just the whole environment and culture of horse racing. I never really know how to rate non-fictions, especially when they are sort of about people's lives. So I gotta sort of go down to the writing style. And while a lot of it was okay, it was just sort of factual rundown of events, there was some inclusions of sort of side characters that I wasn't sure we needed. Randomly followed a jockey at one point to sort of what she did after Tim ended up dropping her as a jockey. And I'm like, well, did we really need that information though? You could have just said that she never rode Tim's horse again, and we would have all been fine with that. This book is kind of sold as a reincarnation story about, you know, Lisa coming back as Lisa's booby trap. But at no time did Tim or Lisa's family or whatever say Lisa's booby trap was Lisa, or could have been. That was sort of what the media story ran it as. And similarly in this, while they mention it a couple of times that people thought that, none of the family ever thought that. So it's kind of weird that they sold the book in the same way they sold the story back in the media days. I'm like, can't you just, by this point, be a little bit more truthful? But instead the publishers went with that. And I'm like, that's not really what it's all about. Now, the tough thing about books like this is Tim Snyder wasn't really what you'd call a good man. It was a business trainer. He didn't get super attached to horses or anything like his wife Lisa did. Honestly, some of his dealings was just a bit probably within his right to do, but not really what you'd call a people person choice. And it said he liked, you know, telling tall stories or long stories that you couldn't really tell if it was real or not, but because of his life, it could be real, but it could also not be real. There's a few discrepancies and things going on, but also Tim was a bit of a storyteller. So I gave it a 3.75, but mainly because I didn't know how to rate it. I'm like, yes, it tells the story, and yes, it gives a background into the hard side of horse racing in America, but it's not what I'd call a super fun or thrilling or impactful read. Unless you're into horses and horse racing and the behind the scenes and that sort of thing, I don't know whether you would like it. It seems a very niche portion of people will like it. I was kind of interested because my grandfather actually trained horses and went to races, and my dad at one point jockeyed and all that sort of things. So I guess in the family there's inklings of it. And so to me it was kind of interesting. A little different because of course it was the Australian horse racing rather than the American. This is American, so it's a bit different. I don't think I really need to give spoilers. So that was The Ghost Horse by Joe Layden. The next book is actually Magic Forged by K.M. Shea, and it is the first book in the Hall of Blood and Mercy series. So in Magic Forged, we follow Hazel, who is a wizard, and she's a rather weak wizard. She can make little sparks of fire. That's about it. And she's meant to actually take over, after her parents, their house. So wizards have houses, and the houses are almost sentient and under the sort of rule of the house head. And so she is in line to take over, and she's like, I am really weak, but I'm the only sort of blood heir to this house. So she's really weak. She gets bullied a lot by this other clan, wizard clan, and there's also this other random relative that's distant who is kind of creepy as well. And we unfortunately at the very beginning must face the death of Hazel's parents, and therefore she is thrown into the role as next in line. But she has to go through this ascension before she can take over the house. But before she can do that, there's a bit of a betrayal of the households and by the entire wizarding community, who are like, she is super duper weak. So she tries to, find the wizarding community. She tries to find the werewolf community. No one's helping her out. And finally she heads. It's the last stop on her list because they are known to be fairly bloodthirsty and evil and cruel. And they are the vampires. And of course she goes into this big meeting, and the only vampire family that are willing to bring in this weak wizard into their family is headed by Killian. And so Hazel pledges her allegiance to Killian and his family, and they bring her in to protect her from all the rebelling wizards. Of course, Killian and his family are rumoured to be the worst of the vampires. So she's got a bit going on. She's heartbroken because her parents have died, so she's in mourning. And her house is taken over. Her house is literally falling apart because she didn't ascend. And her distant relative is trying to marry her so he can take over the house. And if that ain't creepy, I don't know what is. And also, during the book, we're following a serial murder. So the vampires, the reason they bring her in, there's a serial murderer on the loose, and they're targeting the vampies. Now, true to her status, our main character, Hazel, isn't very strong. And because of all this stuff going on in her life, which is very understandable, so I don't hold it against her, in fact, I understand her. She's a weird mix of avoiding all her problems and then facing certain issues head on. So I think she's just focusing on these small points and just ignoring everything else because that's too much at the moment. And honestly, fair enough, girl. And as for Killian, who is, of course, the head of the vampire family, he is said to be very hot, very handsome, and very just ba-dum-ba-dum. He is a heartthrob villain. So all the villain-loving girlies probably love Killian. Killian, for me, was... Killian has made many mistakes in this book, and Killian is not in the good books. In fact, if Hazel and Killian ever come to me and they're like, actually, we want your approval, it's a no. But it is book 1, so anything can happen. But I did enjoy the murder plot going on, serial murders. You get little hints for other plots going on that aren't involved in this serial murder case as well, but to do with her household. So you do get glimpses of that, and I did enjoy that too. Our main girl was a bit, as I just said, avoiding, not paying attention. But I noticed all the clues. I just wish she did, because it would make her life a little easier. As I say, Killian, not in my good books. Hazel, she's fine. Josh the vampire. Now, I don't know, but I really like Josh the emo vampire. Being a vampire, he is pretty much immortal. But at the same time, our lad is obsessed with dying and death. And so he is very emo. And he has a knife collection. Some of the things our buddy Josh says, I'm like, I agree. Josh, vampire, buddy, absolutely. I agree. So yeah, some of the other little vampires are kind of cute. But yeah, so it's a good start to the series. So I gave it a 4 stars. So one of the biggest spoilers is that, of course, our weak little wizard girl Hazel isn't actually weak. Her powers have actually been sealed by her own parents. And they never told her. So she's a bit what the heck towards her parents, who are unfortunately dead and cannot defend themselves in any kind of way. She's been getting bullied and just treated like trash a lot through her life. And I can understand why she's a little disappointed in her parents, a little hurt, a little betrayed. Because fair enough. Like, if you're gonna seal your poor daughter's powers, at least let her know that she's not a complete and utter failure. Because this whole time she's been feeling like there's something wrong with her, like she must be doing something wrong. And yet, no. Her parents knew all along, so I can understand why she'd feel a bit betrayed by that. I said this in my reading blog, but I had an entire different plotline going on because I daydreamed it while I showered. And it didn't work out the way I wanted it. I wanted her to be in the vampire house and sort of sacrifice herself for Killian and the household, despite being weak. And then because she did that, the vampire mansion would choose her as a guardian. And, you know, wizard houses already have a life, but this vampire house would take on her life as its own, and she'd become the guardian wizard of the vampire house. And then she could connect it with a thread to her own wizard house and then bolster. Because honestly, that would be so cool if she could bring life to the vampire mansion. I mean, how cool would that be? But it didn't work out like that. No, instead they had a separate awakening of her magic. And, you know, it still works. Her defeating the evil, rejected vampire lady, it works. But would I have enjoyed a vampire house turning into a wizard's house where the combination of vampire power and wizard power would then be so strong? Absolutely, I think that would have been cooler. But alas, it wasn't the way to be. But let me know if that would have been cool. I think it would have been. I'm still waiting for my thing to restart, but okay, so in the beginning, they're describing Killian's family. So they're the Drake vampire family. And the Drake family are called, like, they're describing the Drake family as this dark, broody, dangerous, fearful, like, stay out of the way. They're really mean and horrible. And I was like, the Drake family's going to be the way to go, isn't it? They're going to be the greatest. They're not cruel. It's just a prejudice. And there's a lot of prejudice in this thing between the different wizards and fae and vampires and werewolves. They keep to their own, but they also hate on the other magician peoples and vampires and stuff. So, you know, the Drake family, when you're comparing it to this creepy man that wants to marry you for the house's power, I'm Team Drake family all the way. Now we get down to my main issue with Killian Drake. I don't know what it is with these men. Having these weak magicians and choosing that the best way to awaken the girlies' powers is to throw them off a building. Because in Eyre Awakens by Elise Cover, the main princey guy takes the girl and tosses her off a roof of this really tall building to awaken her air powers. The only difference between these two men is that at least Killian had someone down below to catch our girlie. Do I still think it's a horrible thing that they just decide to toss them off a building to see if they can float? Absolutely. But at least Killian wasn't literally tossing her to her death. You know, there was a vampire waiting down below. But yeah, he does some strange things, like tossing her off the building, constantly degrading her. Just his banter is like, you poor little pet. He treats her like a pet in this. And there's something about these guys treating the girls as pets or like lesser than, or, oh, you cute little weak, beautiful little servant little bean. You know, there's something about that just puts me off the blokes. I don't know whether there's some girls going out there going, he tossed her off a building. That's my vibe. Nothing like a bit of almost murder to get the heart pumping. And I'm like, that is from anxiety and fear. That is not love. That is, you need to get out of there. That's fight or flight, not kiss and smooch, you know? It's that reaction. That means flee, not, you know, oh, Killian will have to have a lot of scratching, clawing, a lot of groveling, a lot of apologies made. If not in a single sorry, or I am really, really deeply, truly offended by my own actions, I'm sorry, Killian, but unless an apology crosses your lips, I will never forgive you. I'm open if he's ready to apologize, but otherwise, I'm here to get rid of the red flags. Okay, my girl has enough going on without having a red flag bashing her over the head and dropping her off a building, you know? Anyway, that was Magic Forge by K.M. Shea. I gave it a 4 stars. I don't usually read vampire, magician, sort of modern day-ish, not really modern day mixes. But for a first one, it was actually kind of good. Looking forward to the rest. Now, I didn't read these two together, but I'm going to do the review together, because they're in the same series. This month I actually read volume 24 and 25 of Yona of the Dawn. Now if you're a regular on my channel, you know that I adore Yona of the Dawn. I found them through watching the anime, and then I just bought the manga because the anime does not cover it all. It gets you to a certain point and you're like, but where's the rest? So the manga it is, and what a fun time the manga is. So this manga follows Yona, who just turned 16 and is the princess of a land that consists of different tribes. So there's the fire tribe, air tribe, water tribe, and they're sort of ruled over by this one king, who is obviously Yona's father. Anyway, there is a betrayal, and Yona is forced to flee from the castle with her childhood friend slash bodyguard, Huck. And in order to try and help out her kingdom, which she didn't realise was in such a bad state, she goes to search out the 4 dragons. And that's the rough overview of what happens. Now, this series has a lot of political intrigue, a lot of different dark themes going on. Now, this series can follow a lot of really happy comedy moments, a few little romantic moments, but it does cover more serious subjects since there is a war going on and many different ups and downs of these tribes. These two are following Yona as she tries to stop a war between the region to, I believe it's the south, at least on the map it's south, so sue me. Yona trying to prevent the war between obviously her kingdom and the nation of Zing. She actually has teamed up with one of the princesses of Zing, and meanwhile Huck and the others are also trying to prevent any clashes of the Zing ones with the Wind tribe, and there's a lot of army movements going on in these two books. And in volume, I think it's both, but mainly this one, we come into contact with a cult that wants peace between the two nations, but they're a bit cultish. So peace through weird means, let's just put it that way. And of course, I gave these 2 volumes 5 stars, both of them 5 stars. I just love it. It's cute in places, it's really emotional in places. All the characters are just, get attached to, and I want to adopt them all. So, but if you know me, Blue Dragon is my lad, and he doesn't appear that much in these. He has a little, but he doesn't really feature too much in these, and that's really sad, because if anyone knows, me and Blue Dragon, I'm his biggest fan. The biggest Blue Dragon fan you will ever find. On my Yona shelf, I just display ones with Blue Dragon. If the cover has Blue Dragon on it, I am displaying it. Or gazing at it lovingly. Alright, spoilers time. There's a big spoiler in this. A big event, which made me so joyful. Like, kick my legs kind of joyful. Yona finally planted one on Huck. Just straight up smooched him. And I was like, oh, go girl. And Huck, of course, was like, now I say Huck, it might be Hack. Let's not get into pronunciation stuff, okay? I'm not the best at it. And until proven wrong, which I am happy to be proved wrong, I will just pronounce it Huck, okay? Anyway, she plants one on him before she rides off into the distance, and he's like, he's just frozen. He doesn't quite know what to do. And of course, Green Dragon is there to witness and then nudge poor Huck. He's like, what's going on? I don't understand. Oh, sorry. I just read the moment. The moment has happened. The little smooch. And there is, oh no, Green Dragon's not there. Voldo! Okay, sorry. Correct myself from earlier. Sorry, Voldo witnesses it all, and he's funny down to earth. Huck just freaks out, and Voldo is just calm, collected. He's like, calm down, my dude. It's okay. We all witnessed that. It did happen. And Huck's like, what happened though? Like, no, I really need to know what happened. And meanwhile, the Wind Tribe is there at the border with Zing, trying to make friends. They're sharing food, sharing blankets. They're just like, we're besties. What are you talking about? We're just here to have a good time. And the Zing are like, what the heck is going on here? Which is a question we all ask. So Yona in this is trying to meet with Suwon, but through a multitude of channels, she just can't get onto him. He's like refusing any meeting. She's getting exasperated, but really they have no choice. So Huck and the rest end up having to split off, while Yona and one of the Zing boys, who is... So Algira stays with Yona to go on their little Jenny to try and track down Suwon, grab him and say, hey dude, we don't need to fight. So in this one, she finally catches up to him and he's like, alright, I agree to a meeting, eventually. And everyone's like, wait, she's alive? Because of course a lot of people still think Yona's dead. She's not. So they're like, wait, that's the princess? She's alive? Ah! And Suwon's like, and one of the little general people who is on Suwon's side is like, wait, she's alive? And you know this, Suwon? And he's like, dude, that's not a really smart political move to leave her alive. And Suwon's just like, talk to the hand, bro, talk to the hand. So she manages to arrange it, but there's tensions, and of course the cult. The cult is against the war princess, and they want peace, of course, with Suwon. So they start turning the people against the princesses and just being creepy. Like, they dress in black cloaks. Like, if that doesn't give it away, I don't know what does. They look evil. Completely evil. Anyway, but of course the princess gets attacked. Her people start getting killed. It's very sad. And finally, Yona stands in the way as a whole heap of arrows come flying towards them. And of course the dragons, who are all beat up, they're like, oh, no you don't. But they're a bit more savage than them. They all mystical dragon powers. And it's so cool to see, but that's where it ends. You see the dragons go to protect her from the arrows, and the arrows just... And that's it. That's where we're up to. So we got Yona had a kiss. We got some meetings. We got some people being like, wait, the princess is alive. We got Suwon being like, I don't care about outside opinions. We're going to war. And then being like, okay, fine. We'll have a peace meeting. But if they don't come, we're gonna trash the Zing Nation. And I'm like, oh. But then of course you have the bad guys in the black hooded cloaks, who of course are turning the people against the princesses, making them mad, making them angry. That's the way it is. So yes, definitely 5 stars for both of them. Cried, laughed, kicked my feet. It was a beautiful, wonderful journey. Next up we read Jane Eyre, which is about a girl, Jane Eyre, who is left an orphan and is given to her uncle to take care of. The uncle also dies, leaving her with their aunt. And the aunt is not a very nice lady. She thinks that Jane is a liar and a horrible child. And so she sends Jane to this school, pretty much to stay, and then to live and grow up in that school. So Jane goes to this school where she is trained in all ladylike activities, but she's still a bit of a rebel, and she ends up becoming a governess, and then she moves on to the employment at Thornfield, where Mr. Rochester lives some of the time, but he has a charge who, of course, Jane is put in charge of. And so it's about her life. And I ended up giving it a 4.5. It was a good book. I think I said this in my reading vlog that I didn't love all the characters. It wasn't like I was super attached to anything in this book. But it's a good book. Like, it's an excellent book, but I wasn't sitting there like, a Jane Eyre is my girl, or Mr. Rochester, what a lad. You know, they were just people that I was following, and it was a good, solid plot and musings on life. So it was like almost a 5-star book, but at the same time, I'm not sitting here saying that it's the greatest. Like, it's not a rant about how much I love them kind of book. It's a solid, good book. And the funny thing was, I was reading this version, which is actually abridged, but fortunately I was also listening to the audiobook, and the audiobook is much longer and is obviously not abridged. So I ended up listening to it mostly because, of course, this excludes so much of the actual character and sort of musings of Jane Eyre. And I'm like, but this cuts out all the good bits. Like, you don't get half of the plot with the charge, whatever her name is, the kid. You don't get any of that, why Rochester has her. Like, you have a paragraph probably. Whereas in the audiobook, and obviously the original, it goes on into detail, and you're like, oh, that's what Mr. Rochester is like. It makes so much more sense. In this, Mr. Rochester is kind of just a dude, whereas in the original version, he's actually got some depth. Is he a great man? No. He's a flawed man. Let's not get it twisted. But at the same time, he's got a lot more depth to him than the abridged version gives him. Otherwise, I don't have much to say. I don't think you'll need a spoiler version of this, because as I say, it was a great book, but it's not like I'm sitting here saying, oh, this scene especially, or this thing especially. I was just like, yeah, it's a good book. Anyone who's like, oh, it's a hard book, or like, oh, it's too long. It's a great classic book, but I'm not sitting here like in love with everyone, you know? But yeah, that's Jane Eyre. Pretty straightforward, finally. I mean, I go into enough detail in every other book, so Jane Eyre, good read. I just realised I never credited the authors of the last couple of books. So, Mizuho Kusanagi, butchered the name, wrote and arted beautifully Yona of the Dawn. So, props to them. And Jane Eyre, of course, was written by Charlotte Bronte. Just so I've credited the authors. Oops. Next up, we have The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. Or Maas. Don't know. And this book is actually a collection of 5 novellas for the series Throne of Glass. And those novellas are titled The Assassin and the Pirate King, The Assassin and the Healer, The Assassin in the Desert, The Assassin and the Underworld, and The Assassin and the Empire. So they're all part of this book. 430 pages worth of novella. So what is The Assassin's Blade about? Well, we follow Selena Sardothian, who is the sort of top assassin of Arabrin Hamel, who is the king of the assassins. And she's been raised by Arabin to be a ruthless killing machine, pretty much. But despite being trained by Arabin and sort of tortured her way into being as strong as she is, she's still got a bit of a rebelliousness to her. The first novella is The Assassin and the Pirate King, in which she is sent by Arabin to make a deal with the Pirate King. She doesn't know what the deal is, but she is sent along with her nemesis, sparring partner, she doesn't really like, Sam. Then in book 2, The Assassin and the Healer, again, Selena is sent off by Arabin, and along the way she has to stop at this tavern, and she comes into contact with Eyre, who is working at the tavern, but she is the daughter of a healer, and that's really what she wants to do, is become a healer. Then book 3, The Assassin in the Desert. The journey she was starting in the previous novella, she is now undertaken and has arrived in the desert where the Mute Master awaits her, and Arabin wants her to train under this Mute Master until she gets his tick of approval. So she goes on to some harsh training, meets a few people, and tries to gain the approval of the Mute Master. So in book 4, The Assassin and the Underworld, Selena is sent to sort of take care of this assassination job and to steal some documents, and she actually pairs up with her nemesis slash friend Sam to get the job done. Then in book 5, again, Selena and Sam, they've sort of teamed up. They need to do a job because they need money. And so they're like, okay, we can work together on this. But Sam's a little reluctant to let Selena also help raise this money that they need. And Arabin is kind of unhappy with them for reasons. I didn't find Selena to be the most lovable character. I mean, she's an assassin. She's young. I think she's like, 17 or something. And as an average 17-year-old protagonist, she's kind of annoying, full of herself. thinks she is the most strongest person there is in the whole entire world. That she's the sneakiest. She grows on you, but she's not exactly smart, so you're annoyed with her half the time as well. The other characters in this, not gonna lie, hate the Assassin King. Never liked him the whole way through, for reasons. I can't go into detail, but never liked him from the very first sentence I heard about him. I was like, nah, mate. Literally couldn't care less about any of the others. Really, the main person I cared about was Sam, the frenemy. Was he the greatest male character I've ever come across? No. Was he even that endearing? Not really. But compared to all the other characters, was he the best character in this book? Absolutely. 100% recommend the Sammy. Sammy boy is actually literally the best person in this entire book. I don't know what more I can say. Now, let me tell you the ratings. As to why I ended up giving it the final score. It's a spoiler reason. And obviously I will tell you spoiler things. But the non-spoilers, you will never know. The Assassin the Pirate, I gave a 4.5. The Assassin the Healer, I gave it a 4.5. The Assassin in the Desert, I gave it a 4. The Assassin in the Underworld, I gave a 3.5. And the Assassin in the Empire, I gave it a 3. That's being nice, okay. And my overall rating ended up a 3.5. And you may be saying, averaging that out doesn't make sense for that to be a 3.5. It deserves a 3.5, okay? Alright, spoiler crew. Let's get into this. Let's get ourselves comfortable. I can't really get myself too comfortable here, but hello. Alright, the Assassin and the Pirate King. Selena is annoying, but I'm glad she has some morals to her. I'm glad she doesn't stand for slavery. She stands against, she helps those slaves, and honestly, 10 out of 10. I mean, really, she's in a slave contract of her own, isn't she? So it makes sense that she wants to help out her fellow slaves that are doing a bit worse than her, to be honest. I respect it. And do I respect Sam for standing against slavery too? 100%. That lad. Good lad. Glad they could help out the slaves. And just, I already hated Arabin because of that. And it didn't get much better. So in The Assassin and the Healer, it was probably the most healing novella in it. Breath of fresh air, isn't it? Now, I don't know whether Yona turns up in later books. I've only read this one and Throne of Glass. But she seems nice enough. And I hope we can see in the future that she's become a powerful healer. And that her magic comes back. And she destroys worlds. No, that she heals a lot of hearts, a lot of bodies, a lot of souls. But it was healing for me, that novella. It was an easy read. It didn't hurt me too much. So absolutely, it was my favourite novella. Next we moved on to The Assassin and the Desert. What did I think of it? I had a feeling that the girl was evil. She was too nice. These books, you gotta be a little suspicious of the ones that are too nice. Also, the weird, I'm gonna say pervert, that's not the right word, but I can't think of it. The weird pervert plot with the girl and her lover boy, Mikhail. So Ansel and Mikhail. The Mikhail being so old, and they started dating when she was 15. Creepy. It was just sort of thrown in there. And I don't know whether it was so that we sort of disliked Mikhail or not. I understand it's a criminal underworld, okay. I get that such things happened. I bet it wasn't even strange. But at the same time, ew. Ansel, weird. Ansel was always sus, and the moment that Selena finally got trained, and of course Ansel became all snooty, I was like, there's no way that this girl is actually good. Because she flips around her loyalties so bizarrely quickly. And also her going to meet with the, what is this, Lord Beric. That was just suspicious from the very beginning. And like when they stole the horses, etc., I was like, that doesn't make any sense. She's the one meeting with Lord Beric, and nobody goes in with her. Nobody's checking up on the situation. Obviously, bad guy. Obviously, she's the spy. Who else would it be? It's like pointing 1,200 hands. It's Angel. And the way she teams up with Lord Beric, who is obviously trying to kill the Mute Master and the assassins because he wants to get on the side of, like, the evil king. He's trying to get on his good side through this. And yet she's like, oh, he'll definitely help me go and take over the Flatlands. Why would he do that? Why would he be like, oh, you've helped me with the mute assassins. Yes, dear girl, I would definitely send troops out. Ansel is so dumb if she believed any of it. Like, putting 2 and 2 together, and she's like, that makes 75. And I'm like, no! Makes 4. Nothing's adding up here. Now, Elias, the son of the Mute Master, it was just stereotypical romance interest for her. Like, oh, he's hot. He's interested. And that was about it. Other than to later make Sam jealous, I felt there was no point. And to add to the idiots, the Master, suspecting that Ansel was bad the whole time, but was like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. Let's keep sending her to the bad guy, even though I suspect something's up. Like, the assassins that died, their lives are on his hands. But I'm glad he did recognize the abuse that Selena was obviously facing under Arabin and gave her all that gold and stuff. That was really nice of him. In that aspect, he gets a thumbs up. If you're weighing up, you know, assassin kings and kingdoms and runnings, really the Mute Master, whoo, way up there, and Arabin in the mud. The assassin and the underworld. I knew that we were on a slow descent towards doom and destruction. Like we were on a rope, slowly being dangled over a fiery volcano, slowly going down to be dipped in like a chicken nugget, right in the fiery hell that awaited us, you know? Nothing good was going to come out of the next 2 novellas. And I dreaded it with a, like, anxiety that made me not want to turn the page. So when Selena got back from the desert, from the Mute Master, she doesn't immediately say, hi, yep, I'll quit, bye-bye, Arabin, see you later, alligator, hate your guts. No, she's like, I can't really tell him, and then he's like, I've got this job for you, and I'm like, warning flags, boo, 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 it's going off. But does our girlie acknowledge it? No. And Sammy boy, he's obviously being tortured with looking after this weird lady. He also kind of wants to get along with Selena. The whole plot where you know that the people she's being sent to kill are obviously the good guys. That the bad guy is obviously putting on an act because he's at his ex-wife's party. He has to pretend to be the slovenly, woman-loving jerk, right? Because he's at his ex-wife's, who obviously the ex-wife is bad. She's getting cozy, like friends, buddies, with Arabin, who you know loves the slave trade. It hurt me to watch. So the whole fact that she was sent off by Arabin with this whole story that, oh yeah, it's actually to, you know, stop the slaves and everything. He suddenly had a change of heart. Why the heck would he have a change of heart? Arabin, she knows, is trash by this point. And I thought at the end of the Assassin in the Desert, we were finally getting somewhere. But I guess Arabin has his claws too deep. She can't seem to shake him off, despite being bitten by him, literally beaten So of course she goes through with it, and despite having an inkling that she was helping the bad guys, she still handed over the papers. Why? Why would she do that? Like, I get it. Arabin would have come down and been like, where's the papers? And she'd be like, oh, don't have them. Sorry, my dude. Just no logical thinking when it came to Arabin. And I thought at the end of that one, finally, Selena, she's paid off her debt. She manages to pay off Sam's debt. That's cute, wonderful. They finally realize they have feelings for each other. It's all working out. They've moved out. She's in her own little place, which I'm like, well, obviously, Arabin knows where that is because you've used servants to move all your stuff. So it's like, it's not going to be a surprise if he shows up on your doorstep kind of thing. But you know, they're both technically free from all their debt. And I'm like, finally, Selena will not fall for Arabin's tricks now. Surely not. She's been bitten 1,200 times by now. But instead, in The Assassin and the Empire, what happens? She somehow still gets tricked by Arabin. First of all, I'm a firm believer that they should have just taken whatever was on their backs and fled. Who cares if they had no money? And the thing is, Sam was like, it's okay, we don't need money to run away. We'll just go. And then the moment Selena has to spend all her money to get them free of the guild, all of a sudden he's like, you know what, actually we need this last job. No, le fool. Run. Run. Flee. Go. But do they flee and go? No. And so Sammy takes on a task which is so sus from the very beginning. And I saw someone say that they hated that Selena left Sam to go off alone. And I'm like, the lad was literally telling her not to. That's on our Sammy boy. Okay? Sammy boy, he said, no, Selena, you stay here. You can do the next part. I don't want you anywhere near the scene of this thing. Because I don't want to see you hurt. Because he's in love with her, okay? And that's okay. He knew she'd be away. He knew he was taking on this mission by himself. And obviously that was a dumb mistake. Obviously. And here's my thing, okay? Sammy boy, he made his mistake of not taking someone as a backup plan. And also trying to get this deal in the first place. When really they should have just taken what they could, left. They could have stolen some money. They've done worse in life. They can just steal a bit of moolah and gone on their merry way through the county to go get married, have cute babies. But no, our lad is like, no, I want my girlfriend to still live in the life she's become accustomed to, so we need some money. And he took on this task. And then he went off on his own and ended up dead. And Arabin's whole act that he's now a caring father figure, so easy to see through. And Selena, instead of thinking, I wonder why Arabin and his little advisors are randomly having this conversation outside my door. They're standing outside her door when they have this conversation about where the bad guys are going to be. And she's lying in there, awake, of course, listening in. And she doesn't think, that's a bit suspicious. Why are they having this conversation outside my door instead of in the office? And so, of course, she goes straight into a trap, which was so obviously set up. And she didn't even let our buddy boy, friend of Sam, speak up either. Just knocked him out. And I'm like, girl, if you can just let people speak, if you can just let them finish their sentences, at least. Have a little courtesy and let your victims finish their sentence first, because maybe, just maybe, they might have something good to say, something important to say. Just a little pointer there for you. And of course, she goes into this trap, she ends up captured. You can tell from a mile away that the secondary bloke was obviously trying to take over the first bloke's role. And it was obvious that Arabin was helpy, because he was obsessed with her and liked to torture her. Everything he did had some sort of hint towards him just liking to manipulate and have a hold over her. So yeah, the last half was especially bewildering and just so much stupidity. Or just not enough thinking done. And here's the thing, I know that a lot of people say Selena is like a smart girly, that she's got plans upon plans, but she did not in this one. She was an imbecile. She was a bit cray-cray. If I have to headcanon it, Sam and her escaped. They paid that money to get rid of Arabin's control over them as a guild. And they just left, you know? They just went. They were like, oh, this bloke wants to hire us to do this thing. Who needs it? Go. That's all it took. Anyway, the more I talk, the less I like the book. So let's just 3.5. The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. Finally, let's just end all of this. It's taken me days to film this because chronic fatigue, the killer. And I'm just gonna get in and finish this the book. And last of all, one of the greatest books I read this month, and that is A Stepmother's Marchen, Volume 2. What a relief to end on this piece of art. This incredible portrayal of beloved characters, of smart decisions, and of cool visuals. As always, with this series, the artwork is amazing. They've got muted tones for certain emotional scenes, and then brighter colours for more cheery or funny scenes. I hadn't noticed before, but I noticed this read through that where they go back to the past, because they have flashbacks in this one, they have little black pages. Like the pages are actually black where it's in the past. And that's so helpful because sometimes you're like, wait, where are we now? Are we in the future? Are we in the past? Where are we? So that's really helpful actually. And so what is A Stepmother's Marchen about? It is about Marchioness Shuri von Neuschwanstein. And so she marries a Marchen, obviously, and she is still very young. But the Marchen already has 4 children to his first wife. And so she is almost raised by her husband in order to take over the family, raise his kids, and make sure the household continues running after he passes away. It's actually a time travel manhwa. So Shuri from the future of one timeline she's lived through, she feels like her children all hate her. Her eldest is getting married and his to-be wife comes and says, yeah, he doesn't really want you at the wedding. You've done enough. He'll take over the house from now. And she's like, okay. And so she actually gets in a carriage accident and ends up time traveling to the past. So she's there, she wakes up, and it's the day of her husband's funeral. And she's like, wow, okay, there's a few things I could change this time around. So it's sort of her making new decisions. Now that she has better knowledge, she's trying to make sure the family is better situated than when she was kind of still a little unsure of herself. And because she's got this little bit more confidence, she still has trauma from her past and from her future self. So she's also struggling with that. But also, because she approaches things different, the children actually start to see her in a different light. And she actually accepts that in this timeline. And it's just fun to read. because they don't really have a start and end, it's sort of a volume just going through the one story. It's hard to review each volume or give a rundown of what each one is because it spoils the previous ones. As I say, I love the art, I love the characters, and we get to know more about Nora and then the Crown Prince as well. All the random family dynamics going on. And of course Nora's backstory, and then you have the Crown Prince's backstory, then you've got that creepy churchman who is just shiver up spine kind of creepy. He's just like, ooh. And he also, you know, uses the Bible incorrectly, just saying. I don't know what they're basing off his character, whether it's like a Roman Catholic Church or something like that. But either way, he tries to use his teachings to oppress people. So, I mean, that's usual, isn't it? Evil churches aren't an unusual subject for time travel and reincarnation and isekai stories. It's quite an easy target to turn evil. And usually they're doing the play incorrectly, which, you know, happens in real life too. So, good fun. Love the art. Love the characters. 5 stars. Excellent. I've actually got the third one up there. You can just see it. Dude. And the 4th one comes out at the end of this month, which I'm going to get, of course. It's just so good. Especially if you don't want to use too much brain power. It tells the story through pictures and great dialogue and scenes. So it's got a depth of story, but it gives you pictures, so it's easy. You're like a kid, but it's got pictures. It's got pictures. Anyway, love this book. I also technically reread volume 1 when I read volume 2 as well, which of course was great as well. Just look how pretty the book is though. It's like a prized possession by this point. Love it. And that concludes my July wrap up. It was quite a journey. It's going to be the longest wrap up in history. I don't apologise, it's great fun. After days and days and days of filming, we finally reached the end. Let me know whether you've read any of these books, what you rated them, and whether I've inspired you to read any of them. And I shall see you all in the next video. Peace!
T26